Hello, my wonderful English language people. Welcome to the ELP YouTube channel. My name is Abby. I am one of the tutors here. All of us tutors have scored a raw 46 or above. And whether you are looking to be in that top 1%, just aiming for 40 plus, 30 plus, or maybe you just like the English language, we are here to help. Today, we are going to be discussing purpose, essentially, really looking at how we can make sure that we're incorporating Unit 3 as much as possible into our exam essays. A lot of the time, it gets a little bit too easy to forget this component, and it's half of the year. You cannot forget it when it comes to your essay at the end of year exam. Alrighty, so commenting on purpose is crucial, and the reason why we're saying you can't forget it, it's super important, is because all language is there to communicate something, right? The only point of someone using language is because they have a purpose attached to it. Otherwise, there's no reason why someone would be speaking, right? They wouldn't be making the speech, maybe, or they wouldn't be writing a news article, etc., etc. Now, of course, for English language, we also have studied this for at least 6 months straight on how we can actually analyze the language to look at, well, why is someone using language in a specific way to achieve a purpose, essentially to kind of get what they want. In any analysis, even if you think it's a bit more towards the Unit 4 side, maybe you're discussing an ethnolect or something in a higher relation to the Australian society, Australian values, you're pretty much always going to have a purpose embedded into it, which is why it's super important to get practice in touching on this, sort of no matter what prompt you have. So I'm going to run us through 3 exam prompts, and these are from the 2024 sample exam. And we're just going to have a think about how we can break it down, how we can kind of attach different analyses and look at it in different ways to get the most out of the example we may be bringing from even right now in the year, whether you're watching this in June or you're watching this the night before. Wherever you've got your examples from, you want to be able to bring them to that day in October, late October, early November. So we open up our paper. This is the 2024 sample exam. What is the first question we look at? If you're anything like me, this actually will be the first question because you'll turn straight to the back. And here, with our essay section, the first question is, the language of division and exclusion is more prevalent in online spaces. Now, this is quite an interesting one because we read division and exclusion and they're relatively negatively connoted, right? Someone is to be divisive, or if someone is to be a bit exclusionary, exclude someone, it's often thought of as a negative thing. And that's probably quite an intuitive way for you to sort of go about it. However, we should consider it from the other side, be a little bit creative with what this prompt is allowing us to do, how much leadway we've got here, and think, well, is division always a bad thing? And if we're thinking, okay, well, in the context of online spaces, even if you're sort of struggling to think of this prompt, relate it to yourself and think, well, in online spaces, you may usually discuss things with younger people, people in a similar demographic, people with similar hobbies. Well, in a way, you're kind of divided up, right? You're sort of excluded into different in-groups, establishing an in-group in potentially an easier way in online spaces. We have a lot of slang in the way that we text and communicate, even through, say, Instagram. I'm not going to say Facebook, but that sort of social media platform. We have even the use of hashtags, etc., kind of reconstructing this ability to divide or assert who our in-group is. So if we're thinking, well, okay, 2 ways you could at least go about this is in online spaces, division and exclusion, yes, it could be more prevalent, but not in your potentially stereotypical way of looking at the words. And a lot of the times, it could be a positive way that we have this in-group and out-group occurring. Now, of course, looking at the other way, potentially the more intuitive way, is to ask yourselves questions like, well, in online spaces, what else do we get in a higher proportion? Well, we probably might get more mixture of different demographics in a sense of if someone puts something out publicly, it is available for everyone, whereas you'd have to get everyone to come to an auditorium to even get that same effect. And that, of course, opens ourselves up to have potentially more offensive language or kind of this more negative exclusion in online spaces as well. Now, if you're thinking, well, how can I attach the purpose to this? It's kind of right in the way that we've been discussing it right now, right? There's this purpose of dividing, this purpose of excluding, and it's up to us to either say, yeah, it happens more, no, it doesn't in online spaces, and then deconstruct what that actually means. What does division mean? When we purposely divide, is it a good thing sometimes? Now, that kind of take away from the intuitive, oh, division and exclusion kind of negatively connoted, can really elevate your essay and your analysis. Alrighty. Number 7, if we're thinking, okay, I've read through, I don't like the first prompt, let's see what the second prompt has in store. You've got your maybe 12 minutes of reading time still to go. Question 7, without a doubt, the tenor of a conversation has the most influence on the politeness strategies of the participants. Okay, well, a few things we could think of here. They've given us quite a few variables. In the first prompt, it's kind of just this idea of division and online spaces. In the second one, we're going to already be known that we have to discuss tenor, and we're going to be discussing positive and negative politeness strategies, and then by extension, positive and negative face needs. So we already know that this prompt has probably given us a little bit more in the sense of an expectation of the baseline meta language we should be covering. Now, if we're thinking, well, how can we attach purpose to this, or how can we be sure to kind of think about the different purposes that people have, is firstly, okay, well, politeness strategies, usually we think of someone wanting to be polite, right? So how are people polite? They might be wanting to include people, they might be wanting to meet positive face needs, they might be wanting to create a warmer tenor. Well, if we look at it the other way, we might be thinking, okay, well, other purposes we can attach to this are being impolite. And then, of course, if we're thinking how we could further branch this out, we can think of the study design terms like encouraging solidarity, etc., etc. Whereas impolite is potentially the opposite. So excluding, creating an in-group and an out-group. And then how we use the tenor to kind of assist our purpose. You can see, in a sense, a lot of the meta language you guys have been learning, that we've been kind of trying to digest and understand, all kind of contribute to achieving a purpose. It's like we've got purpose as this underlying thing, with all the tenor and the register being the elements we use to achieve such purposes. Now let's go to question 8. Now, if this was me and this was my exam, it's probably the one I would choose. It's kind of the most broad, it's almost the most go ham, and it's widely and publicly held attitudes in Australian society can be shaped by our language choices. This is basically language impacts society, society impacts language. So, how many purposes can we attach here? Really, your answer is probably going to depend on your contemporary modern examples. If you have a lot of them that are supporting, say, an emotive function, supporting someone needing to express how they feel, you might really say that there's this purpose of showing your opinions to others, this purpose of you're wanting to express an emotive function, this underlying intent of getting some rage out. Now, if you look on the other hand, maybe you've got something that's really encouraging people to be together. You might be saying, well, this maybe reduction in register, this kind of warmer situation, this warmer tenor, maybe it's reflective of wanting to have a closer social distance. And if we're thinking, okay, well, what are widely and publicly held attitudes about this, after we've just been brainstorming Unit 3 relevancy, is, well, our values as, say, Australian people, therefore hitting the kind of widely and publicly element, we can think of potentially they are people having a go, having a crack. Or maybe we value our politicians to be perceived as being down-to-earth people. We kind of have the tall poppy syndrome, etc., etc. So you can see that you can make it quite intuitive to go from here is the register and the purpose, attaching a purpose to each example that you analyze is a must-do. And then you can have Unit 4 and that kind of sociological perspective about our values filtering all throughout. Now, of course, you can kind of keep going with purposes. I've put a final one here, like of wanting to hide an opinion, and that can be relevant. Essentially anything as long as you're making sure you're showing that it's about widely and publicly to really be addressing the prompt and not just do like a prepared essay kind of thing, will be able to demonstrate an insightful capability. I'm going to now walk you through one of a potential paragraphs that you could do. The prompt I've chosen to kind of respond to is potentially prompt 8. We're thinking of widely and publicly held attitudes shaped by our language choices, or even just how you can discuss purpose in general. So, and essentially making sure we link it to the identity of the people speaking, putting out the language, as well as linking it to the audience, linking it to the purpose, the intent, the functions, etc. If you've watched the ELP videos before, you might be quite familiar with this format, and it's one that myself and all of us on the team highly recommend you follow. We have our yellow topic sentence, and then you kind of warm us up, give us a sentence on what you're discussing. Here's kind of this context surrounding it. Give me the example of meta language. Green is potentially the most important, along with red, that you really want a strong analysis of your example, or at least just have some opinions about your example, essentially. And then you're going to be wrapping up and how it relates to the topic sentence. So here we go. The purposeful language choices implemented by people and institutions can covertly change attitudes. You can see this is kind of responding to this prompt to a sense, or another, well, purpose of changing attitudes prompt. How do we get that? Now I'm going to expand on that. You can see my yellow topic sentence has allowed me the breadth to discuss a contemporary example by a person and then one by an institution, both in the public domain, to give myself this kind of ability to show that I'm trying to discuss as much as possible. I'm discussing rather broad things in a way. Now, if I keep going, I'm going to narrow my scope and say, okay, well, the one that I'm going to be talking about in this example coming up is going to be in institutions. So this is particularly relevant in the domain of public language use, particularly by those who hold institutional or governmental power due to their broad reach to an audience of many Australians. An additional example is the language choice by the Bendigo Council when informing its citizens of a change in bin collection. The website features a formal register and uses jargon such as noun phrase, Victorian Government Circular Economy Policy, and City of Greater Bendigo Climate Change and Environment Strategy, immediately reinforcing a pre-existing level of expertise and authority to the Bendigo Council. Now, you can see here, I'm sort of doing two things. Firstly, I'm providing some background context. I'm ensuring to put the year and the month. And then I'm also ensuring that I use meta language. So instead of saying the text, I'm labeling it a website and being as specific as possible. Instead of labeling it uses the language, I say the noun phrase or the noun phrases. And I say it's using jargon. Now you can see quite instantly there is this taste of, okay, I'm getting this more Unit 3 centered analysis. I'm going to get some jargon, some discussion of register because we're using formal register up here. And so it's quite clear that this is a discussion of purpose driving language attitudes and the relationship between the two. Now, as I kind of introduce and go into my green section where I'm going to be breaking down my example a bit more, I kind of still use, I love the power of a comma sometimes, to just kind of provide an insight into exactly what I'm about to say. What happens when we have a kind of almost an institutional body, right? This government council. So it has some sort of societal authority, and they're the ones, of course, making changes to something that's going to affect a broad audience, right? Now, I'm going to say, well, what's actually happening if you're this kind of broader, bigger kind of authority group with some level of authority, is that you already have expertise and authority. So it's reinforcing a pre-existing level of expertise. This is something I really want students to keep in mind because a lot of the time we kind of accidentally potentially use language like creating or making, when in reality we should be very mindful that in the circumstance where we're discussing something where there is already power, you're likely going to be reinforcing or kind of encouraging the further existence of. Now, as I go into my green, I'm going to break it down. Of course, you have kind of the whole year to create examples and kind of get fired up and have opinions about them. And I highly recommend that the more sort of creative, the more hot takes you can have, the better. But ideally, you at least want an analysis of kind of, well, this is how it's impacting the purpose. This is how it's impacting other elements of context that are important in answering your prompt. For example, the introduction of statistics and policies to the somewhat broad audience. And you can see I label it as broad to be as accurate as possible, so the somewhat broad audience, is of anticipation of members in the Bendigo community automatically disliking the changes. Once again, I've been really specific in saying my audience. It's not necessarily something that's going to take you extra time, right? By saying audience, people versus like the specific community, so the specific location these people live in, but it can really elevate your response because you're showing that you understand who the audience is. And if we're thinking, well, we want to be hitting all our elements of context, discussing who the community is the audience, and the audience is one that we're needing to hit. The formal register assists in mitigating potentially negative actions against the change by establishing authority to them. These are concrete, and providing reasons why in the form of jargon. This does not necessarily obfuscate the actuality of the bin collection changes, but actually does the opposite, delivering the message in a precise and instructional way. And you can see here, if we're thinking, well, a lot of purposes may be potentially to hide opinion or to obfuscate, can be relevant. And if you get a prompt that is discussing obfuscation, hiding opinions, you can kind of pick up this part and then change up your green, change up your other elements, but already have versatile examples is what you should be looking for when you're thinking about how you can kind of make it the easiest on yourself when you're hit with the exam. So if we continue finishing up the green section, you can see it's not a lot. It's potentially about 3 sentences, and it's just enough to kind of discuss and break down elements like jargon, register, formality, purpose. So what's the purpose? Delivering a message in a precise and instructional way. And it's also mitigating negative actions against the change felt by the citizens, which I've identified as Bendigo community members. Now I'm using my blue to call it down, and I always highly recommend that even if you can kind of keep going with a comma, full stop, and have a separate sentence that does not need a reference to your example before you tie it all up. Otherwise, it's almost kind of not messy in a sense, but you're sort of lacking that overarching zoom out of here's what my example shows. In this one, for example, you could use something like, overall, in the creation of political policies, formal language can be used as a tool to obfuscate or make changes in a euphemistic light, covertly changing public attitudes. Now, you can see this is the second example in a broader paragraph, where in the cool down sentence, as I've discussed up here, where you would have 2, kind of breaking down between people and institutions, in your discussion of the final sentence, you can touch on them both as well. So we're saying it's a tool to obfuscate, potentially in my first one. And then, well, what's this one? Changes, making changes. And then covertly changing public attitudes. I hope this was a helpful breakdown. I hope this was helpful kind of thinking how you could tackle the prompts. I know it can be a little bit challenging and daunting when you're hitting your exams and your SACs with a prompt that you've never seen before, but remember, a lot of the time, it will never be, not a lot of the time, all of the time, it will never be testing anything you do not know. A lot of the time, we think of how the year is structured. Unit 3 is our register. Unit 4 is our kind of identity. There will pretty much always be a question on one of those, and it will be something you can easily discuss. I hope this has been a helpful and nice way of thinking how you can approach prompts. I highly recommend you check out the ELP YouTube channel, and have a lovely day or night.